Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tuesday Night Fiction. I'm Nicholas Austin. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different things. First, I'd like to start with Chapter 4. So, this chapter was entitled To Get Her Apart. In my opinion, it's the greatest chapter title of all time, and I'll tell you why. So, what we talked about last week with the Joker, right? The Joker is the devil. He is the type of villain who doesn't try to overpower you. He tries to set you apart. He tries to make you commit to things you wouldn't normally do and set you against the binary. He tries to set you against the opposite side. He makes you red and he sets you against blue. And that's his goal, is to make you be the one to kill blue. The Joker doesn't want to kill blue. He wants you to do it. So in this chapter, we focused in the beginning on Latera, who is at the hold. She has a plan to kill Clovis Keegan, who is, in our story, the Joker. And he, during her assassination attempt, sets out one of his men to capture her, bring her into this little room, throw a bag over her head. She thinks she's going to die. Fortunately for her, she's not. However, the goal of these people becomes clear when they tell her that her job now is to spy on the Tokali, right? So the rival clan of her clan, the Vahani, her job now at the hold is to spy on them. The Keegans make it clear to her that they don't know if they can trust them, and they want her to do their bidding there. And they're taking advantage of her hatred that she already has for them, because of the fact that they obviously herded her people south and basically have them in prison now at the hold. So we can see Clovis Keegan pretty much be enacting that Joker plot, right? Enacting that good guy boat versus the bad guy boat. Who's going to blow who up first? We're going to make them do whatever they're doing to each other rather than us doing it to them. And that is what a psychopath wants more than anything, right? I mean, these people aren't strong. They are weak. The only thing you could do to really hurt them is say no, right? They don't want to be the one to blow up the boat, as we talked about. They want you to do it. And here, getting back to the chapter title, To Get Her Apart. So obviously they're trying to get her apart from, metaphorically, like herself, literally to separate her from the, I guess, slightly more connection that she would have to the Tokali as natives of this territory, even though they're rival clans. They're trying to separate her from them and create division between those two groups, and to make them think that the other group is the rival. Keegan clan is just the Keegan gang is just the group at the top, right? So then they're trying to distract them from the real villain here. So obviously that is one part of it. To Get Her is like together but separated, so it's kind of like together apart. Now that they've been shepherded south, they're all together at the hold. The Keegan gang, the Tokali clan, and the Bahandi clan, all together at the hold. And the goal of the Keegan clan, again, is to get them apart. So they're together, but the goal is to get them apart. There's so many layers to this title. It was probably one of the more clever ones I came up with, and I'm proud of that. As I'm reading through book 4, to speak a little bit to the author side of things, starting to see, it's just interesting to see over time how your writing style changes, how things improve, how you can get a little bit deeper on stuff like the title when you're not worrying as much about how to write or how to do this or that. You can start to get more creative with some deeper things, some deeper meaning things, and that's pretty interesting. I really like that part of it, especially now moving on to book 5, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's where we left off with Latera. She's captured now. She's dealing with all sorts of difficulties at the hold. On the other hand, in the north, we have Dominic Turner, who is captured by the Vahani of the north at the Great Fortress. He's in a prison cell, manages to escape. He's a very crafty guy. and hijacks a horse, kidnaps a girl just to have a hostage. He's desperate at this point. He's just trying to get away, and he is eventually chased down from those same Bahini led by Chieftain Varric, Grand Chieftain Varric. But as he's going from the south side, or Chieftain Orin, Hansa are traveling north to talk to the Grand Chieftain, and they come across Dominic. So he gets kind of surrounded by all the groups and eventually identified by Hansa as his friend. So he is, I guess, in a way rescued there. But that's it for chapter 4. Another pretty exciting chapter. Action is just going to keep ramping up now that the plot in a way has kind of been set over the first 4 chapters. And we'll get more and more into how the storylines evolve. Is a pretty intense book. It definitely, I think this book, even, I don't want to say more than the first book, along with the first book, definitely sets the stage for what this series is. And it's really interesting. I can't wait to get into the themes and stuff later on in this podcast, talking more about what it all means and where it's all going. For now, though, I think that's most of what I wanted to discuss about the chapter. Again, these early chapter ones are a little difficult, especially with this book. It's 11 chapters, so there's the chapters are each a little bit shorter. There isn't as much meat as it's being built up. When I say meat, I don't mean in like action or in not that there's not a lot going on, but there's not as much thematic discussion to be had because I can't spoil anything. But for now, there's a lot of other stuff I want to talk about. So one, again, we've had the last couple weeks on this recap, on these recap episodes. It's been a lot of passion, I guess. It's been a pretty exciting season 2 so far, and tonight I want to talk specifically about something I read about Game of Thrones, right? So you may or may not have heard about the interview that the writers of the show, Weiss and Benioff, recently did. And it was most of the responses they gave during the interview were tweeted out by, I guess, someone who was there, and apparently erroneously. They basically portrayed the responses as something that they weren't, which is something that I should have assumed. Twitter is such a cancer that it's almost shocking how much is just not true. It's like telephone except 1,000 times, or it's like a telephone with 1 million people, right? I mean, if that makes sense, millions of people, whatever the user base is. It's just telephone to the max, to a point that's just so dangerous to your even perception of reality. Like I came out of reading tweets and reading posts responding about those tweets, thinking that what Benioff and Weiss were saying was that theme doesn't matter. And that's not even what they said. I mean, they said it doesn't. It's kind of weird. When I read the actual quote, so what they were saying, and so I'm going to try to talk about, because there's a lot of interesting things about this conversation that you can get about writing and about everything. And I recently had a friend ask me about like how editors, how it's like working with an editor and if they try to change your story. So I want to get into a lot of that because I feel like I can speak to a lot of that now. And I think it's also useful, again, just to highlight the fact that you can't really always rely on what people say if it's not from the horse's mouth, right? So what did they say about themes specifically? Because that to me was the worst of it, right? There was people responded to the fact that they didn't know what they were doing, I'll get into that, why I don't think that's a big deal. But really the theme part. So what they were saying was that because Game of Thrones is such a big show, because there's so much going on, there's so many characters, each character has a different kind of arc, that they don't think it makes sense for them as like their opinion of the way they write is that they don't want to boil it down into a slogan, right? Like what is the one meaning, right? And they did mention also that there are other writers who disagree, and they respect those people who disagree, which is a good thing to say, right? I disagree immensely. I mean, I don't think that it needs to be one meaning, right? Like, you could have different meanings for different characters, but overall, the story has to have some kind of purpose, right? I mean, you have to have some intention of where it's going and why, and what you're trying to say with it. And this is the reason why season 8 was such a disaster. And I just think if that's not proof that it shouldn't be like just other authors. I mean, they should, if they didn't grow from it and learn from it, that's not a good approach, then I don't know. I mean, good thing they're not making Star Wars anymore, because the message of Star Wars is clear, right? The message of the best Star Wars, which was the original ones, is clear that you can't give in to the dark side. You can't give in to the temptations. You have to fight the temptations and you have to rise above them, right? That's the message of Star Wars. It's also a redemption story, right? So again, it's not just one message, but they all revolve around similar themes, and you have to decide what those themes are. And what they said is they're focused more on the characters. So I guess if you're saying, like, if you're going to decide what the message is for each character, that's fine, right? Like, you could have a different message for each character. Obviously, like, Arya isn't the same as Sansa, so they're going to come out realizing different things. But they can't contradict at the same time, right? Like, you can't have one character realize that vengeance is a good thing and then another one realize that vengeance is a bad thing, and because then you're not saying anything, right? What's the point of watching if the opposite messages are being sent? Like, what are you trying to say, right? And I don't even mean necessarily that you have to say anything, really. I mean, well, that's not true. You don't. This is what I love about podcasting, to go on a tangent. Like, you can basically work through ideas, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I'll get to that later, but I just wanted to say that. But you don't have to, like, your message could be that this movie is just a comedy, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. But with Game of Thrones, it's just such a complex story, and it is sending a message through the first 1 through 6 seasons of some kind. So for it to end on just such a pitiful note without any consistent direction, if it had a theme, it would have. Having a theme is like having a vision of any kind, right? If I when I was making my trailer that I made for my series, right? Like, I had a vision for what it was going to include. I had a vision. I knew why I was showing the scene I was showing. I'm showing the girl running away from her burning house, right? Because that's the opening of the book. That's the scene that I want to show. That's the feeling I want sent, that there is a urgency and that there is a feeling of being chased, right? Without that theme, I could have just made a trailer about the woods, and so you need to decide what the direction is. You need to have a sense of direction as a showrunner, and I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, it's kind of like the idea of being like a centrist, right? It just doesn't it doesn't get you anywhere, right? You need balance. You absolutely need to be balanced. You can have opinions from either side of a point of view, but you need to, there needs to be a moral code. You need to decide what's right and what's wrong, because there absolutely exists a right and a wrong. And if you're trying to just always be a centrist for the sake of being a centrist, then you end up with what you had in Game of Thrones, right? You just end up with just something on a screen that doesn't follow logic that was built up or anything. And that's kind of what happened there. So again, it's not as bad as I thought it was, right? On Twitter, the Twitter version of this conversation said that these guys just laugh about theme, like that they just don't even care, like that I mean, it literally made them sound like two guys who are on, like, in high school on the football team, who were like, "Oh, stories are for nerds." I mean, that's literally what the Twitter post made it sound like. It wasn't that at all. So, on the one hand, it's not as bad as I thought, but I also think that they're mistaken. And because I know that these guys are going to be involved in movies and shows that I watch in the future, I hope that they learn from it. On the other side of things, so I want to get into George R. R. Martin's side of it too, because he is the one that I see that I've really just lost all respect for, honestly. And I'll get into that. But the other thing that people complained a lot about when it comes to the interview was the fact that Weiss and Benioff didn't know what they were doing in the beginning, right? And this is the most toxic mindset that I think people have, is that you just have to you can only have people who have a knowledge base or something. Like, you can't, this is like the typical afraid to fail type of bullshit that people live with all the time, that if you don't have experience, if you don't have a college degree, you can't do the job the same, or you can't do it right. And also, not even just do it right, but you can't learn as you go, right? Like, you can't learn and fail and get better as you go, because I mean, if these guys, it seemed like, from what people were, the interview was saying and what they were saying, they've done movies before, they've done things. It's not like this was their first go around in any film or any art form of any kind, but this was their first go as showrunners, from what I could tell. And what they were basically saying was they were kind of figuring out that process as they went. They were figuring out the pilot part of it, the selling the show to producers or whatever. So they were going through all of this stuff for the first time. And, that takes courage. Let's say Game of Thrones ended on a phenomenal note. Would you be making the same complaint? I mean, the first 1 through 6 seasons, or 5 seasons, whatever you think was the good part of it, were incredible. It was some of the best TV ever made. So, for you to say that they shouldn't have been trusted with it because they were, noobs to the process, they weren't experienced enough, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Your favorite part of the show was the beginning. Your favorite part of the show was the part that they knew nothing. By the time they got through that, they knew plenty. They knew what they were doing. By that point, they at least knew how to tell the story the way that you wanted it told. So again, if you think that that's a problem, you need to go out and do something new and just not worry about failing it. Like, I don't know what it is, but just go find something that you can commit to and put a lot of effort into, and just fail. Like, me writing these books, I haven't written books before. I wrote these. I didn't even read a lot before I wrote these books. I read more now. I just watched a lot of TV, and I was just like, I got really into stories, and I realized how much I watched movies, and I was like, I want to tell a story. So I wrote books. And whether that ends up being a success or not, it's irrelevant, right? You either, the only thing that you can do is keep going and keep doing what you're doing. And if you think that because you didn't have the knowledge base in the beginning, it's just not worth it. I heard this argument too on like an author page on Facebook, and it just pissed me off so much. Like, somebody wrote something about the fact that they released a book and it got a lot of bad reviews, and because of like grammar and this and that. And some piece of shit responds to him and says, you should just not release books. You should just keep reading more, and you should just read endlessly, and don't write, because the more you release, the more bad opinion people are going to have of you. No, they're not. What are people's attention spans nowadays? It's like literally like 5 minutes or something. I don't remember where I heard that, but I'm pretty sure it's very, very low, people's attention span. So if you come out with a book and it bombs, or you do whatever you're doing and you don't succeed, you just keep doing it. Do it under a new pseudonym, right? Like, you think people are going to remember that J.A. Abrams is the same as R.L. Stein? I mean, it's not. It makes no sense to do something and then give up because it didn't succeed. It's just, if you enjoy doing it, you do it, and then you keep doing it. And that's the only way to get where you're trying to go, to get to success, whatever that means for you, right? I mean, this idea that Weiss and Benioff shouldn't have been given the show because they didn't have experience is nonsense, right? It's complete and utter nonsense, and it's coming from the same people who are just such cowards that they would make other people feel bad about the idea of failing. Failing is the best thing that can ever happen to you. Ever. So go out, do something you don't know how to do, and fail at it. Because if you don't, you'll never get to the point where you know what you're doing. You'll never get to the point where you can write book 5. You think I think book 1 and 2 in my series are perfect? No. There's a lot of things that I would have done better. I would have made less characters. I would have named less. That's one thing that I know, and I've known from the time that I wrote book 1 that I could have done a little bit differently. Am I going to change it? No. Am I going to give up? No. Am I going to stop writing and do something different? No. I'm going to keep telling stories, and I'm going to do the best job that I can. And I can see them getting better as I go because of the fact that I learned from the first time when I failed. And I don't even think it failed. I mean, my book's crush. The Civilands series is fucking awesome. So, take it from me. Don't give up. Because if you give up, then you get nowhere. Anyway, this is, again, that is just part of the interview that people responded to that I think they responded the wrong way. I disagree with that critique of that part of the interview. The only other thing that I'll say about what they were asked, another thing that people misinterpreted of what they said. Somebody said that they replied about the audience that they were trying to get, and they said they didn't care about the fantasy elements. They wanted to get rid of the fantasy elements because they wanted to appeal to mothers and football fans. First of all, they didn't say that. That's not what they said. They said, I don't even think, from the quotes that I saw, they didn't even say mothers. They said parents. They said they wanted it to appeal to our parents and people who watch football. And I don't see the problem with that. I mean, if you're trying to make it, maybe that's their demographic. Maybe they like football, right? You don't know. Like, if they are fans of football, I love hockey. I love football. I love all sports, but I also like writing fantasy books. What's the problem with trying to make it appeal to people who like a breadth of things? I don't really. I mean, I'm into pretty much all forms of entertainment. Does that mean that I'm not a fantasy fan? I'm not like a true fantasy fan? Whatever, I mean, they're trying to make it a story that's more widespread, that feels more realistic, and I like that. My books are more like that. There's no like crazy fantasy elements. one of the things that they specifically said was proper nouns. So I guess what they were saying there is that in fantasy books, there's a lot of proper nouns, whether that's related to names or places or like spells or elements, I mean, it's not to say that you can't have magic in the show or that you shouldn't, but it just translates different in a TV series, first of all, than in books, because what I realized is a lot of times when you're watching TV series, you don't even, at least me, sometimes I don't even know the name of a character, and you don't need to. And that's something that, as a person who was inspired to write because of TV, I realized that's one of the reasons why I struggled with that in the beginning of including too many characters by name, because I thought in the book that would help. It still doesn't. It's still the brain still. It's still hard to keep track of that many people at one time. I promise you, they all make sense still. Everything still fits. Okay, but it's hard. It's easier on TV because you just see an actor and you're like, that's this character, and you don't even necessarily need a name for them. Like the main ones, yeah, because the main ones, it's almost helpful to have a name just for the marketing, like so that you can relate with Walter White. That I can talk about Walter White later. But if Walter White had no name and I just saw Bryan Cranston in character on screen the whole time, I'd still be able to identify his role in the story. I'd still be able to know who he is. You can't do that in a book, right? You need the name there to some degree, but the more names you throw in there, the harder it gets, right? So with a TV show, for them, it doesn't seem to make as much sense to use all these proper nouns, which you have in a lot of fantasy stories because there's a lot of different elements, especially ones that are thousands of pages long, right? So that's all they were saying there. Again, I think Benioff and Weiss handled the series terribly. I think they suffered from the same problems that George R.R. Martin suffers from, and that's why they came together. Maybe. Again, that's kind of what I want to talk about next and understand next is what George R.R. Martin was thinking, because if you are writing a series over the course of your lifetime, because he's old, I don't know when he started it, but I assume it's been at least 10, 20 years that the guy has been working on this. I had an ending in mind from like day one, or at least book 1 or 2, right? Because you have to have some idea of the message you want to send and what you want to happen. Otherwise, how do you get from point A to point B? Maybe he thinks, so for me, it's 5 books, right? So I think in terms of point A to point E first, kind of, and then I condense it from how do I get to A to B? How do I get from B to C? But I know where E is, so it's easier to get from in between, right? When it comes to George R.R. Martin's series, I mean, there's a couple messages that I think are in the book, right? The first, and I don't think this is a message that he intended from the beginning, the global warming angle of it. I think that he was, sure, I mean, maybe like environment, like maybe we misunderstand the environment, right? We're not treating the environment right, and we have these squabbles, and we don't realize that we're not caring for the environment enough, right? So that is one message that maybe he wanted to be the main theme of the whole series, right? The other one, maybe it's the opposite, right? Maybe he's saying that maybe the Night King, or not the Night King, because I don't think that was in the books, but maybe the White Walkers were just a cool element that he wanted to add. Maybe the real point he was saying is that political squabbles will go on forever. They'll never end, and it's always going to be a part of what we deal with. No one's ever going to really have a claim to power, and any claim to power is just illegitimate because it's just an endless cycle of it should have been this person, should have been that person, and no one is really fit to lead. Maybe that's what he was trying to say. There's a lot of things that it probably could have been, but clearly, I think very, very clearly, he didn't establish that up front with the showrunners. So he signed away his work, his life's work, to two guys who he had to know were new, which is fine, right? It's fine that they're new. I already said that that's fine. But he didn't establish with them clearly where he wanted it to go and what he wanted to say. Because, you know, they can say that they focused on the characters, but by the time that they got to the end, the characters weren't even the characters anymore. They were all assassinated, all of them. Every character was... I can't think of one character that wasn't completely ruined. That their trajectory over the course of the whole series wasn't completely thrown off in the last season. Maybe Brienne. But then she writes the book at the end, and I don't... She clears Jaime's name at the end. I don't get that. You know, whatever. But yeah, most of them were assassinated. So again, going back to the themes thing, and they say they care about characters more than themes. I don't think they were good at either. They didn't do either. So because George R. R. Martin in the end signed away his life's work to guys who he didn't even establish the intent with, right? So it gets to the end and it's not all for nothing, right? Game of Thrones is still, through the first 1 to 5 seasons, some of the best TV there ever was, and it's a very exciting thing to watch. It's got to be cool for him to see his work on TV. Do I wish that I had my stuff on TV? Obviously. Would I want my stuff recreated in the same way so that the first beginning is good and then the end isn't? No. I don't think it's worth it to sell your life's work just for it to be ruined at the... I mean, my opinion of Game of Thrones is not the same as it was before season 8 and 7. So, you know, it could have been the best TV show ever. You know, Breaking Bad will live on forever. It will always be one of the best TV shows ever made. But Game of Thrones, it's just what could have been because he didn't do the due diligence, or even he just didn't work at it. And it's funny because it kind of is fantasy mirroring reality. Like, George R. R. Martin's characters are exclusively emasculine. Most of them have their dicks cut off at some point. And the character that ends up the king in the end is a cripple who is worthless. I mean, Bran is the most worthless character I think I've ever seen. I don't know what the purpose of him is. You know, if you're going to have these kind of these deus ex machina driven characters, you need a reason and you need them to have a purpose, and it just didn't. It just didn't. And they obviously had George R. R. Martin they didn't have his books, right? They didn't have source material for the last couple seasons, but they had to have had him around. And if they did, and this was what he told them to do, this is what he told them it was leading to, it's just so pathetic. It's just so like but it's indicative again of what this series has been. And it's not based, it just doesn't seem to be based in like reality or like masculinity or in morality. You know, there's no morality in it to the point where it's almost nihilistic. Like, it almost just feels sad. Whereas like Lord of the Rings, you know, I mean, George R. R. Martin always complained, I guess his idea was to write a story that was more brutal than Lord of the Rings, I guess. More like the result of war is that the good guys sometimes die, right? That's fine. That's okay. At the same time, it doesn't make much sense for central character who has always been based in honor and has been developed, to suddenly be worshiping his queen by the end, who just burned a city down. You know, I mean, it's like, that's not really close to reality. You know, I mean, you have the powerful rise up, the people with morals. If you're going to develop that they have morals, they're going to stick to those morals, I would think. So it's just, I think George R.R. Martin is kind of an outcast, and I think that this book, his series, is kind of like the outcast's idea of him being the hero. And in the end, in reality, George R.R. Martin wasn't the hero, right? I mean, he signed away his series at the expense of the most important parts of it, which are the message and the ending. And I mean, to me, it's just kind of sad, you know? I mean, he builds up the most oddball of characters, and you know, you could say that, like, he's got a lot of money now, he's got notoriety, so in the end, maybe in reality, you think he's the winner. If you think that he's the winner, then I don't know, man. I don't think he could be happy with people's response to the ending. He's probably fucking miserable with it. And I don't know what the deal is with his books. I don't know if he's going to finish writing them. I assume he will. And I hope that they please his fans. I don't want him to be in this position. I hope that he turns it around. But it's just kind of, you know, it's just kind of sad to see as a writer, as someone who, again, got into this because of TV shows, who's inspired by the concept of turning books into TV shows. You just wish it could have been different, and you wish he would have done more due diligence. So I blame him more than Weiss and Benioff. I think Weiss and Benioff are just they were just trying to do what they dreamed of doing. They're the ones that took the risk. You know, they're the ones that went out and tried to do something new and tried to put their feet to the fire. And for the most part, they did a great job. If they had taken George R. R. Martin's vision and they had his full vision, I'm sure they would have finished it the right way, if that vision wasn't what he already gave them, right? I don't see the scenario where what they put up for season 7 and 8 wasn't what he wanted. I just don't see that. Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe they're trying. Maybe the job of HBO, you know, is to try and hide those squabbles that happen, right? It's kind of like in like Star Wars, where Mark Hamill disagrees with the direction of his character, and, you know, PR wise, it's not good that he's going out and complaining about it. However, it's just, I don't see that happening. I don't see where, like, Martin even complains at all, where he even gets upset about it. And I just don't know why he wouldn't have been involved, you know? So, again, I don't want to harp on it way too much, but if it's me, I'm not letting that happen. And I'll get into, so again, with the editor stuff, so that leads pretty good into the editor stuff. So I talked to a friend recently, like I said, about what you let an editor change and what you, under no circumstances, change, right? Because you don't want to be censored in any way. You want to say what you're trying to say and not let anyone else's opinions, biased opinions that are different from yours, change that, right? So the way I kind of boil it down is into three things. I think that one, you have like the grammar, the writing style, and like more of like the technical type of writing, right? When it comes to those things, I think that a writer is either really focused on those or they're more focused on like plot, right? And character and where the story is going. I'm more focused on the story. So when it comes to the grammar and those things along that line and the writing style, I've deferred more to the editor, right? I'm not going to, like, if my editor makes changes that I don't think flow right, in my opinion, or if they make changes that I don't think sound like they don't sound like from sentence to sentence like something I would write, then I'll make a tweak from what they tweaked. But for the most part, I know that my editor knows more than me in terms of one, grammar, punctuation, those kind of things, right? The technical kind of things. So I mostly, if she tells me something is off, then I'll make that change. The second thing is plot, right? And this is way more contentious, I guess. And I'm not saying it's contentious between me and my editor, but it needs more proof. So like, for example, if it's how did this character get from here to here? Like, they jumped somewhere. Like, so they were in this town and then they made it 30 miles in the time it takes to go 15 miles, right? If it doesn't make sense what's happening, then the case is made for that by the editor. And if the case is good, then I'll make the change, right? If it's a plot point that is more up in the air, like if it's more, why is this character making this decision, right? Then it's more of like a talking through process. And if it doesn't get to the point where me and the editor agree on it, which it usually does. I mean, if the story is consistent and the character's arc is consistent, then usually it's pretty. I haven't really had many or any times where we just straight up disagreed on a motivation or something. But those things usually require some deeper talks, right? In terms of the third thing, so again, just to recap, the plot is a little bit more of a discussion and a case made, and there needs to be more evidence as long as it stays within the realm of the third thing, which is the theme. And the theme is not up for negotiation, right? If my message is that vengeance is bad and my editor is like, well, I don't know, I think vengeance is actually pretty good. I think people should murder the people that murder them, you should murder the people that murder you. No, they should take vengeance on the people who murder their family or something, right? If they're trying to tell me that the message needs to change, or that a character's traits should be different than what they are, right? Not are they consistent, but they should be different. Like, that's where you have to draw the line, right? Should Arya be more dainty? Like, that's where you're just like, no, she's Arya Stark. She shouldn't, right? Should Laterra be more timid in book 2? No. She already went through hell. She's hardened now. So I think it comes down to what they're trying to change exactly. And it's kind of goes on a case-by-case basis, but I think that's probably the best job I can do in terms of boiling down what or how I think through things that my editor is trying to get into. In the conversation I had with my friend, he also asked about an example of a person who works with a publisher, which I don't. I self-publish because this example is not happening to me. But in his example, he brought up a publisher who was trying to take out something in the story. They were trying just so that it would sell more, right? They were trying to take a scene out or take a thing that this person says out because it was I guess vile or something. I don't know. Something about what was said was a little bit much for a wide audience, right? And again, this is why I don't work with a publisher. I'm not saying I never would, but would I let them change things? No. It's just not worth it to me. It might be to some people. If it's a thing in the story that's not, all that important, right? If the sky is blue and the publisher is like, I think the sky should be green. And you're like, well, it's a fantasy story, so I guess maybe in this world the sky could be green. Screw it. Or if you say that the grass is long and the publisher is offended by long grass, and then you're like, screw it, we can cut the grass. And then you cut the grass and you cut it shorter. Things like that, I guess, aren't a big deal. But if you're trying to send a message with something and they have a problem with it, I probably wouldn't go along with that. But I have yet to see that. So I don't know how much I could speak to it. I just will say that overall, because I'm probably going to wrap this up now, the two lessons of the day: don't take the money, and always have a reason, right? And I'll probably make the title of this episode something along those lines. But don't take the money. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to take the money at the expense of your work, of what you're building. There's way more important things than being a rich troll. And understand the reason why you do what you do. Are you writing a series for 20 years in order to become a millionaire? If so, then it really doesn't matter as much how the series that you helped build ends, right? It doesn't matter that there's no message that you've sent. It doesn't matter that the messages that you seem to be building up are reversed and the characters are reversed. Because, like I said, George R. R. Martin he's done success-wise, he's done a good job for himself. He's made a lot of money. But is that what you want? If it is, then take it. But if not, if you're worried about the outcome that we saw there with Game of Thrones, definitely don't. And then also, when it comes to endings, know what the ending is and know why the ending is what it is. Because if you don't, you end up with Game of Thrones. I'm not going to talk about Game of Thrones here every single week. I just think that this was a pretty useful discussion with not just writing, but with any endeavor. Again, the lesson of being okay with failing is just such a crucial one, and it's cool to see how it plays out in a scenario that's so popular like Game of Thrones and with the writers. So hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it was useful. Reach out on YouTube and Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're listening to this, and let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you have gone through a similar scenario of wondering whether you should sell out or not. If you did or didn't sell out, why did you or why didn't you, and what was the result? How did you feel about the end result of that? But I think that's where we're going to stop for now. If you enjoyed what you heard, whether you did or didn't, subscribe. No, I'm just kidding. If you didn't enjoy it, don't subscribe. But if you did and you want to be part of the community, subscribe. Every week we go 1 week on a chapter from the Civilands series and then another on these recap episodes. This is going to go all the way through the Civilands series. So the whole series is going to be available for free on this podcast in audiobook form. You could also get the books on Amazon. All the paperbacks in paperback or ebook. That's the best way to support the podcast. The paperbacks are way better. Paperback books are way nicer to have. They make you look more intelligent. They make your friends envious. And there's 4 of them now. The 5th one will be coming out in 2020. It's in the process right now. I didn't even get to talk about NaNoWriMo tonight, but I will be talking about that in the recap episode after Chapter 5, which is next week, and then the recap episode the week after that. It will still be NaNoWriMo. So NaNoWriMo, for those of you who don't know, is National Novel Writing Month. It involves a challenge to write 50,000 words of a new book. So for me, that's going to be book 5. I'm progressing okay with it right now. I'm not really even close to where I should be, but I don't know how worried about it I am yet. I will again, we'll talk about that more in 2 weeks on where I'm at that time. But until then, this has been Tuesday Night Fiction. I'm Nicholas Austin. Subscribe, follow my channels. Let me know your thoughts, comment. You can find more at www.nbaustinbooks.com. There's a contact form there if you want to talk to me there. Until then, enjoy the Civilands series, my